Go. Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for October 6, 2017. We begin with a special order calendar. Continued hearing items. Item number 1, 30201BZ, 2519 Creston Avenue, the Bronx.
The applicant has expressed that they're going to install a new fence. Do we have any questions or comments about this?
My only comment is that I'm very happy to see that the chain link fence will be replaced with the iron fence and really do it, and it will be really an improvement on the quality of the neighborhood, and I really appreciate the applicant's responsiveness to our comments and would like to know what the installation schedule is for that.
Yeah, it definitely upgrades the appearance and condition of the site.
Item number 2, 15207BZ, 8701 4th Avenue, Brooklyn.
The applicant made a submission. Fire department approved the applicant's sprinkler plans. I know that Commissioner Montanez had some question about that. Do you still have any further questions?
No, that's adequate. Fire department accepts the sprinklers as installed.
Great. And made a submission with a new sign analysis and corrected the compliance chart, as well as a letter from the architect documenting the sprinklers as we just mentioned. Any other issues, open issues?
New cases, item number 3, 82259BZ, 1774 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island.
Okay, this is an application to amend a 1960 variance to convert an existing automotive repair station to allow for a convenience store and to enlarge the building. My comments are, there are photographs showing the building, and there's also drawings showing the material of the building and the addition, but the rear is visible to the neighbors, and none of the drawings show how that's going to be treated. There should be a drawing that shows the rear of the building and how that's going to be treated, hopefully in a manner that is aesthetically appropriate for facing residential buildings, such as stucco, for example. Also, the plan shows new trees being planted along the perimeter, but then kind of stops abruptly where perhaps it's the existing trees to remain, but the plan doesn't show that. So please make that clear. The perimeter must be fully landscaped with trees that are really going to conceal the use from adjoining residential properties. And a question, since most of the interior of the structure now will be devoted to the convenience store, I don't see where there's going to be storage area for the service station. Storage area on site is not permitted, so there needs to be an enclosed structure for storage. Anybody else?
I was concerned that they're going to be putting new condensers on the roof, and I'm wondering if those condensers are going to make noise, and they need to maybe tell us if there's any mitigation that they need to do in that regard. And also the curb cut configuration has changed from the last approval. So I'm wondering why. We've got a really large curb cut on Manor and 2 on Victory, and I'm wondering if there's a different or anticipated different circulation pattern on the site. If they could explain that, that would be terrific.
Yeah.
Going along with the curb cut, I visited the site, and actually the curb cut on Victory closest to Manor Road actually impinges on the pedestrian crosswalk. So I think they should look at that, and they should put on the plans where the pedestrian crosswalk is located. I also know that this intersection was scheduled for a DOT enlargement to the widening line. A couple of years back, I wanted to know if have any information about that, because the only thing that's in the widening line is the sign. And perhaps they could also consider an alternate plan in case there is a move to purchase some of the property in the widening line. So anyway, if they could address that, if they know if there's been any progress. There's something adjacent to the convenience store in the southeast corner of the site in front of the parking spots, which I'm not sure what that is, if it's just a platform or if it's a structure, if they could clarify that. And they've added a vacuum and air pump on the property line adjacent to the residential on Victory Boulevard, which wasn't in the prior approved plans. They could respond to that, if that's a nuisance, or if the hours should be limited, if they could move it.
Or shield it from, so that it's not a source of noise. Pumps always have that sort of, that little blast noise that could be quite annoying. And then just to pick up with the intersection of the curb cut and the pedestrian crosswalk, how in fact does that work with respect to pedestrians? Isn't that a risk? Was DOT advised of this? I just don't really see how DOT would have approved a curb cut that extends all the way across the pedestrian way. Anything?
Could they just reconcile the signage that is on the plans with the signage analysis sheets, because all the figures are different?
Tip. Item number 4, 96487BZ, 786 Burke Avenue, Bronx.
Well, so this is again an amendment to a previously approved variance, and there was an extension of time to obtain a certificate of occupancy, which expired in 2012, and I'm wondering what in the world is holding up obtaining this C of O. So if the applicant could discuss that and explain what they're doing to clear that up and to obtain a C of O, because we can't keep extending this for no apparent reason. My colleagues will speak more about the condition of the site that they noticed on site visit, but the photographs alone, and usually you clean up the photographs show trash on and along the site perimeter and very badly maintained fencing, many vehicles parked on site when there's actually only approval for a total of 20 cars. The condition of the signage and the facade is very poor, all of which need to be repaired. The drawings are not clear. Are they depicting new work to be done, or the existing conditions? Because the signs are in this kind of ragged, especially the ones that are the panel signs on the building, and should be upgraded. There's notes on the drawings that there's new painting and moldings and so on. Is that actually replacement or painting or whatever? And again, there's no drawing of the rear of the building, which affects the residential neighbors. So the rear of the building also should be shown on the drawings, and the building should be repaired, painting. There's also several non-compliances with the prior approval from the board, and that must be brought into compliance. The signage doesn't comply with the C1 zoning. That was stated actually in the application, so obviously the signage has to be brought into compliance. A C of O has to be obtained, and apparently used car sales are occurring for which no grant was issued, and outside storage is being provided, and outside storage is not permitted. It has to be in an enclosed area. The statement of facts has some confusion about the car parking. It needs to be revised to reflect what the plans show, which was 10 cars for monthly, well, the original plans, 10 cars for monthly and 10 cars for those awaiting service. And then the statement of facts should reflect the request to modify that to decrease to 18 spaces with 12 monthly, 3 for store parking, convenience store parking, and 3 that are awaiting service. And then the question, given the photographs that show so many cars on the site, given how crowded the site is already, I'm wondering whether 3 cars awaiting service is actually sufficient for this use. Also, the flood lighting that's proposed, I saw there was a lighting diagram that swears that you hit 0 lumen by the very second you hit the edge of the property, which is amazing light control. So finding that a little hard to believe. The floodlighting should be dropped down lower because really the only purposes of it is to light the tops of people's heads and the cars. So there are floodlights that kind of can extend further onto the site but are lower so they don't shine into the windows of the adjoining properties. The fencing that's surrounding the site was made opaque by installing these kind of little vinyl slats, all of which seem to have been frayed. That fencing needs to be replaced. Any other comment?
I went to the site and I saw in the back, to me, the backyard, which is now used for monthly parking, could use some tidying up. It looks like it's an absolute mess. There also appears to be gasoline pumps back there that aren't accounted for, and I was just wondering if not only could you put them on the plans, but tell us what that is for in the rear. And the screening between that and the residential needs to be made a lot more dense and also tidy and nice, neat, so that people wouldn't mind having that next door to them.
I agree. I'm not sure whether the gas pumps are actually in use. I think that they're sort of junked. So they probably should actually be removed. And I too went to the site and I saw junked cars. So I'm not sure whether they're, receiving cars from somewhere else that have been in accidents or something like that, but they were, clearly on the site and either that's fine, but I think that they should have a place for them that's, probably enclosed somewhere, not just sitting sort of on the sidewalk.
This resolution, the prior resolution, actually requires that they maintain the planting strip and street trees around the site, and from the photos, it's obvious they haven't been doing that on Barnes Avenue at least.
Item number 5, 20392BZ, 7020 Austin Street, Queens.
Okay. This is an application for an extension of term on the Lucille Roberts Gym. And I noticed that it's actually the applicant provided there's violations for operation of the gym without a public assembly permit. Not really sure if you always need public assembly permits for gyms, but please show if that's required the PA filing. And the other thing that's not clear is whether the fire alarm system was installed pursuant to the approved plans and connected to the fire department. If not, it must be connected. It can't be delayed. It has to be done immediately. I'd probably say prior to grant.
They have that note about the fire alarm system will be connected if required by the BSA, and they should really modify that note to remove the if required. And one of the conditions of the prior resolution was that they come into compliance with some ADA requirements. I see they've put in the ramp. Could they confirm that they've installed the ADA bathroom?
I think the drawings actually show that there is an ADA toilet installed on the far left side.
And their sign analysis is not in compliance with C2.
Anyone else?
Okay, item number 6, 15907BZ, 2402 86th Street, Brooklyn.
It's again an extension of term for special permit for the Stillwell Sports Center. I didn't have any comments on this. Did anyone else?
Could they tell us what the size of the mezzanine enlargement is going to be? What that brings the total to?
The total floor area too. There's actually, I think it was a later submission.
Oh.
There is a zoning calculation on the sheet that shows.
How much of the mezzanine is being added?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
336 square foot mezzanine, and it's going to have storage and a pantry. And they showed a zoning calculation where the building is underbuilt. Even with that, it's allowed to have 38,000 square feet, and there's 33,000 in the building.
Got it, thanks.
Okay, as Yeah, the plans weren't very clear to me regarding where the mezzanine was located, but I also had questions about, I looked at the DOB biz site and I noticed that they filed for sprinklers and a fire alarm system in 2014, and it was disapproved. So I'm wondering if they've ever installed those items in the PCE. And the applicant said that the owner is working to correct violations, but I wasn't really satisfied with that because some of the violations had to do with complete blocking of egress stairways. And I would like them to give us photos of all the egress stairs to show that they're clear and accessible. And the DOB violations regarding the elevator is really for the PCE use only, I think. So I think that should also be attended to by the PCE.
Appeals calendar, decision items, item number 7, 19-12A, 3830 28th Street, Queens.
Okay, I didn't have any comments on this. The applicant answered all the questions.
Okay, this is new submission.
Everybody okay with this one?
Okay. New cases, item number 8, 10614A, 84 William Street, Manhattan.
This is an application to request a variance of the court regulations under the multiple dwelling law, section 26, 7, and 30. I think the application was quite clear. I do have some comments, and generally the subject of the gap between the multiple dwelling law and the zoning resolution, and in the zoning resolution not providing any guidance about the size of courts, and therefore having to defer to the multiple dwelling laws regulations on courts has been an ongoing problem, which I hope will someday be cleared by one of the legislatures or both. But I would like the applicant to explain a little better about what the MDL regulations are specifically that apply to the use group 2 Class A dwellings, which defer to the court regulations in the zoning resolution, and how that differs from the multiple dwelling law regs on courts for use group 5 Class B, where the zoning resolution provides no guidance. There's no kind of link in the argument that says why the zoning resolution applies to the Class A residences and doesn't for the Class B, and therefore why adequate for Class A, and kind of nonsensical that it wouldn't be adequate for Class B. So if they could just tie that together better. Anybody else on this?
Could they just provide us some information about the ventilation system that will provide the clean air for those units that are actually compromised in terms of their light and air?
Also, they've got skylights on the third floor roof that I imagine seem to be operable and are above a generator room. So I'm wondering if they actually sort of positively ventilate into that courtyard, which would impact whether or not people can open up their windows. And then, are there ventilation ducts and intake that require space in that courtyard? And also, how many windows would be operable? I don't think they actually tell us that. So those were my questions about the courtyard itself.
Anyone else?
No.
Item number 9, 14214A, 92 Fulton Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this is an application for the development of a building in the bed of the unbuilt portion of the mapped but unbuilt portion of Fulton Street in Manhattan. I actually didn't realize that was an unmapped street. And I appreciate the very thorough history that the applicant went through about the mapping of Fulton Street and its widening and the history of development within the widening since the mapping in 61. This is the only site on the block that has not been built within the widening area. And the only question I have is, do we have DEP sign off on this? I noticed on the prior application for building in the bed of a street, we had DEP sign off.
We do. Sorry you don't have a copy. I have all sign-offs, DOT to EPN, FDNY.
Okay, great, thanks. You don't have those. Sorry. Thank you. Anybody else?
Okay, zoning calendar, decision items, item number 10, 300-12BZ, 36 West 93rd Street, Manhattan.
We will note that at tomorrow's hearing, we're going to be reopening this case briefly in order to accept the applicant's October 2nd submission. We will not be taking additional testimony, and the applicant responded to opposition papers that were submitted to us September 23rd, which outlined a set of possible conditions the board might entertain to impose on the applicant. The applicant has responded to those conditions in detail, and concerning most of those conditions has stated that they could comply. It should be noted that there were no new issues raised in their papers. So again, we will open quickly and accept their submission and close quickly. There will be no testimony.
Does anybody have any comments on this about the recommendations from the community about traffic lights and the response?
Well, I thought that the applicant was putting forth some very reasonable options in terms of seeing if they can get a red light camera on 93rd and Central Park West and seeing if they can get a left turn signal, because I think that will slow the charging cars that are rushing to make that left-hand turn and endangering pedestrians. I wasn't so sure that I agreed with the opposition suggestion that there be loading in another spot and then shuttling of children to another space in order to load. I think that's going to cause a lot of problems in terms of, the logistics of dismissing children and then first having them load onto buses and vans and then move to another location, then unloaded. And I think not only will it exacerbate the traffic problem on that school block, it will exacerbate the traffic problem on the west side, and it'll also compromise the safety of the young people by having them get in and out of cars in various locations.
Agreed.
Okay. Item number 11, 50-14BZ, 825 Manhattan Avenue, Brooklyn.
This one, we just need to reopen to receive the Landmarks Commission's certificate of no effect, and then we can close on that. And there were no issues that I know of.
No issues. Item number 12, 130-14BZ, 605 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan.
So again, a special permit for a physical culture establishment, the Shiva Sam Spa, and I believe we received all the sign-offs, and there are no issues that I see.
Item number 13, 206-14BZ through 212-14BZ, Lanark, West 12th Street, East 7th, Beach 43rd, Thursby Avenue, Beach 87th, and Beach 100th Street in Queens. This is a build-it-back project.
Okay, generally, the applicant submissions were complete and no issues, with the exception of calendar number 208-14BZ, which is 119 East 7th Road, which will need to be deferred because they need to submit additional materials. So we'll be granting them a deferral on that.
Continued, I'm sorry.
Were there any other comments on this?
No, I'm sorry. Continued hearing items, item number 14, 350-12BZ, 5-32nd Street, Brooklyn.
This one is going to be adjourned.
Item number 15, 185-13BZ, 97 Franklin Avenue, Brooklyn.
The applicant submitted, sent his HASP to DEP, and I think he needs an additional 2 months for that, so I suppose we will be deferring this, or giving it an adjournment until we hear back from DEP.
Item number 16, 19313BZ, 4770 White Plains Road, the Bronx.
Also to adjourn.
Item number 17, 27113BZ, 129 Norfolk Street, Brooklyn.
With this one, I appreciate the applicant submitted a much better study, even a very good study of the surrounding floor area and FARs on the block face with essentially a photo montage of the streetscape so that we could see what all the adjoining properties are like on Norfolk Street, both sides of the street. In terms of in future, since this applicant does a lot of these kinds of applications and anyone else who does these kinds of special permits under 73-622, the streetscape should be accompanied, the images should be accompanied by the data, so it's easy to see what the floor area, FAR, and lot size is under each image. That way it can kind of encompass the whole study at once. And also, it's very important to distinguish between projects that were built with permits versus those that were not, because actually it's hard to imagine how they have so much floor area if they were not granted a BSA special permit, and there were many that didn't on the list. So I suspect that there's some errors in the research, and that needs to be improved. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say I agree with you as to what to put into the study. I think it's really important to put the floor area as well, the floor area ratio, the floor area, and the lot square footage, because it just helps you to put that home in context. So if they can do that going forward in all of their studies, have it all in one place, on one chart, with one set of photos, that would really be helpful.
And I still have a question about them moving that wall. I had asked them to give me a little more clarity on how they arrived at being able to get a 4-foot 3-inch side yard. And everything that they've given me, it shows that they start out with a 7-inch wall, 7-inch space between property line and their foundation wall. And then they're showing me that they're pulling back from that, but they don't tell me why 4'3" is either an existing non-complying condition, or how did they get this? Because none of their information, graphically at least, shows that they can pull that back to 4'3". Why not 5 feet? It just, they still haven't answered that question for me.
And I was just happy to see that they brought down the height of the building in the front, where it was the cathedral ceiling. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's an improvement in terms of character finding.
Anyone else?
Item number 18, 14414BZ, 1751 Park Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, again, I appreciate the applicant's responsiveness to our concerns about this special permit to allow for a children's preschool on the second floor of an existing building right opposite the Metro North train, actually. And the responsiveness to our concern about sharing a lobby with Bailey House clients who use the floors above. They provided drawings showing a completely separate lobby with a dedicated elevator, and we understand and we expect that the fire doors will be locked from the fire stair side so that nobody can come into the second floor from the fire stair, and that the dedicated elevator will only open on the second floor, and it's not to be used for any other purposes. The one question that we did have, because if you just kind of look at the floor plans of Bailey House and also of the proposed school, there are going to be a lot of people in those spaces, and that in the event of a fire, many of them will run down the fire stair that egresses right through the lobby, the sort of the lobby that's the Bailey House control lobby. And so there really does need to be an occupancy and fire egress calculation and study that assumes a significant percentage of the people will egress, or maybe at least 50% of the people will egress through that fire stair, and that the lobby is large enough to accommodate that egress. Oh, and we received the DEP sign-off with respect to the noise at the windows. Anyone else?
New cases, item number 19, 11714 BZ, 101 West 91st Street, 121 and 139 West 91st Street, and 114, 124 West 92nd Street, Manhattan. It's the Trinity School.
This is an application for a variance to allow the enlargement of the school on top of an existing garage building. So there are a number of questions on this. So the site is the subject of a large-scale residential development, and we've been provided with no information about how that controls the site. If the applicant could provide the city planning resolution and the improved plans for this, and discuss how the floor area was allocated among the buildings, and are there any other approvals from any other agencies needed, since this was part of an urban renewal plan? Is there an approval from HPD needed? Is there any kind of minor modification required by DCP to amend the large-scale development? Because the floor area arguably is moving around. Usually there is a need to do that. And then just a bunch of questions. I note that the netting for the turf area is set back 30 feet from Trinity House, and the structure is 50 feet back, and the sunshade is 50 feet back. So if I understand this correctly, because the structure and the sunshade are 50 feet back, which is what's required by the zoning for a building, the applicant's taking the conservative view either that the netting is a building or that the lower portion of the building is a building that abuts, even though it's not within any distance of the windows of the residents. That's just a question for clarity about how that's being interpreted as building. And then with respect to the playing field, there isn't any discussion about what the dimensions that are required for a playing field. The statement of facts states that it's currently 31,000 square feet and change, and it's proposed to be 21,000 square feet, but why can't it be 16,000? It doesn't explain to us how you get from one to the other and still a functional playing field. There must be some kind of regulation for playing soccer or whatever it is you play up on a playing field. The other question is, in looking at the existing drawings of the building, I note that towards the west, on the western perimeter, there is no staircase or elevator or any kind of a core existing. So the question is, why couldn't the playing field essentially be pushed further to the west, and that stair and elevator core be located in the rear yard equivalent, which is already being reduced anyway, and that would then enable the entire structure to be pulled back 50 feet or more and then not be an issue for the residents. And kind of with respect to that rear yard equivalent, I know the drawings are inconsistent, so I'm not actually sure what's the right answer. One drawing says that the distance between the rear of the building on 91st Street and the rear of the proposed structure is 20 feet. There's a place where it gets to be wider, but basically it's 20 feet along most of its length. And just imagining the height of the building is going to be 60 feet. So a 20-foot wide gap in there is just not the most, never going to have any light. So in terms of calling it a commons area at grade, the school can do with it as it will, but in terms of protecting that area and not, say, using it to relocate the stair and elevator core, sort of not getting it. It seems to me even the common area could even be covered if that's a more useful for the school rather than keeping it as really kind of a light shack. The other question is about the sunshade. Since we've observed that no other rooftop play yards in the city have it. Why does this rooftop play area need a sunshade? What is it doing that other rooftop play areas don't do? What have you observed with other schools? What have they had to give up in order, because they don't have that shade? We have, of course, seen tennis bubbles, but that's a completely different issue, and I certainly understand that the sunshade is not a building code requirement. And if you do have a sunshade, then can it be retractable when not in use? Because sunshade seems to be the main problem for the neighbors because it's effectively opaque, or at least partially opaque. Then what's the height of the netting requirements? It's not clear why the structure is the height that it is, and how the netting works. Is it a draping type of netting, or is it rigid? Because the structure makes a kind of sculptural solution, but it's not clear at all whether that's rigid and whether the netting will move. A sample of the netting would be helpful, maybe, to understand what we're talking about. The other is, what's the finished floor height of the playing field versus the finished floor height of the loggia? The plans don't actually provide either of those heights in elevation above Manhattan Datum or National Geodetic, but there seems to be something like a 3.5-foot difference. So the question is, why can't the floor-to-floor height of the classrooms be reduced to align with the loggia? I note that the floor-to-floor height of the first and second floor is about 14 feet. So why is the third floor, which seems to have the same kind of functions, 15 feet floor-to-floor? If you kind of brought everything down a little bit, you would align those two portions. The other thing is sort of a little bit of the aggression of the structure against the loggia, where it's closing off this kind of open fencing that they had and creating a wall there. If the loggia and the rooftop were the same height, rather than a wall separating them, it could be glazed and actually, arguably could function as a viewing platform for sports. And then the other is, will the playing field be lit at night? And if yes, how will the residents be screened from the glare of sports? Sorry, this goes on a bit. If you could provide data on how the number of classrooms and labs are determined that are viewed as required to meet programmatic need. The diagrams, which are great, show required adjacencies in current and as-of-right conditions, but it doesn't in any way make clear how the number of students how many students are being served in today's building and how their schedule works currently. There is some statement about some classes being held in the hallways and things like that, but we don't understand the schedule and how the proposal will modify that schedule and alleviate crowding and all of that. We actually need to see the nexus between classroom count and the proposal, essentially, and the need. And then there's an inconsistency in the application about the size of the labs. The statement of fact says the labs need to be 1,000 square feet, while the report from Bob Rogers says that the architect says that it's 900 square feet. And then if you could provide data from a recognized school planning source to support the size and quantity requirements as opposed to just the letter from the architect. I'm sure that there are official sources for that information. And then, and just the other is there is rooftop room on both the middle school and the 91st Street portion of the Hawley wing. And I'd like to hear why it's not feasible to put some of the program there. And one floor, for instance, probably wouldn't obstruct the loggia. It's not clear because we don't really have those kinds of heights. So why couldn't it be spread out more like that? And then I have just two more. And then in the parking count, that there's a reduction in the amount of parking for Trinity House that's shown on the drawings. And the question is, did the large-scale residential development or the urban renewal plan or contemporaneous zoning regulations limit or prescribe the amount of parking that would be required for that development? And finally, with respect to the air intake, we want to just make sure that there's no exhaust system that's associated with this. This is strictly air, that the ducts that are needed to exhaust or sort of extend from the lower levels of the structure up above don't extend higher than the level of the playing field. And is there noise associated with it? There probably is, so how will the noise be mitigated? And that's all for me. Anybody else?
Just very comprehensive. I just have a couple of additions. The programmatic need, I understand that they're looking for physical and interactive connections between sort of like spaces, but it wasn't clear to me how these new spaces interact with the existing space. They've got a new performing arts area, and they are asking for sort of backstage space and makeup rooms, et cetera, but there doesn't seem to be a direct connection between either the auditorium or the Morse Theater. So if they could maybe plug that hole up a bit. And then I also had a question about that mechanical area between the field and the tower, and whether or not there was going to be mechanical equipment in there, was there going to be noise, what exactly is that air intake? Does it service the tower, or is it servicing the school, or both? And then also, they gave us information on noise levels, but I'm wondering if the inclusion of an enclosure up there is actually going to make the noise levels more, because the noise doesn't actually escape as easily as it does when you're taking, sort of those levels on an outdoor room. So I'd like them to speak a little bit more about that.
I have just a few questions. I agree like you do as far as the uniqueness finding. It would be great if they could bolster their programmatic needs conversation by telling us a little bit more about the upper school in terms of how many students there actually are in the upper school, how many classrooms they have right now, and how do the 13 additional classrooms serve them? Is it that they only have 260 students in total? Are there less students and they need flexible schedule space? They need to go into more detail about that. And as to the character finding, it would be great if they could just address the impact of the two-story addition on the brownstones to the west. It looks as if one of them has lot line windows that will probably be blocked up. And while I do know that they are not protected, it still would be nice if they just addressed the issue in the paperwork. Also, I didn't see, and it could be that I overlooked it, was there any kind of a photo with a superimposed play structure that I might have missed? No. Because it would be helpful if we could have that, like from the street view, to see what that actually looks like in place on top of like the two-story addition, just to get a real feel of the impact to the block.
Great. Anybody else?
No, I think most of what I was going to say has been covered.
Item number 20, 17413BZ, 2449 Morris Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, this is, again, it's a special permit, or it's an extension, essentially, of a special permit to allow the establishment of an expired physical cultural establishment, Lucille Roberts, on the second floor of a two-story masonry building. So I guess sort of the biggest issue is that the existing space is not ADA compliant, and the applicant states that they have some kind of a Department of Justice approval, an ADA waiver. So we really would like to see that waiver, because it's kind of surprising to me. This is a place of public accommodation, big time. And I don't really understand how DOJ would waive that requirement since installing an elevator is probably not an unreasonable thing to expect of such a large corporation. In terms of the application, the special permit findings really need to be beefed up. That doesn't go through the requirements clearly, including we need a fire safety narrative in the findings. And the fire department had quite a long series of comments, so which I will read. The plans should reflect the following and show these notes: that a minimum of 3-foot wide exit pathways shall be provided leading to the required exits. Pathways shall always be maintained unobstructed, including from any gymnasium equipment. And then an improved interior fire alarm system shall be installed in the entire the physical cultural establishment space. And also, you really need to install or demonstrate you have installed area smoke detectors, manual pull stations at each required exit, local audible and visual alarms, and the connection of the interior fire alarm to a fire department approved central station. We do need to hear what the fire safety conditions are on the site at the moment, and if they don't comply with those requirements, a schedule for their installation. And I would have to say in that case, since this has been around for a long time, that this would be prior to grant. It's been around for 15 years, and there's been plenty of time to install that. Anybody else on this?
Could they just reconcile their signage on the plans along with the signage on the signage analysis sheets? In one section, it says it's not compliant, and on the plans, it says it is compliant with C4, and the numbers are off as well.
Item number 21, 3814 BZ, 116 Oxford Street, Brooklyn.
This is again this is a special permit to enlarge a building under 73622. So there seems to be sort of a threshold problem with this application right from the start. The first is it's an extremely weirdly shaped site. There's jogs along the side yard line, which creates a jagged set of rear lot lines. And the drawings absolutely do not comply with any rear yard regulation along those jagged rear lot lines. So even if we were to grant, for example, a 20-foot rear yard reduction from the required 30 feet, the drawings show either no rear yard or almost no rear yard. So actually the application will need to be modified to either comply with that requirement of a 20-foot setback from the rear yard, or because it's such an oddly shaped lot, you might want to consider a variance application here. In addition, as is required for all the applications of this type, you need to provide information on the properties to the rear and adjacent to this property to enable us to understand the impact of the rear yard reduction on neighboring properties, and to provide heights of the structures that are built to the rear lot lines on the adjoining properties. Also provide streetscape photo montages showing both sides of the street with the floor area ratio and lot area for each building, and whether these buildings are built pursuant to Department of Building permits and BSA approvals. The statement of facts needs to be corrected with respect to the height of the raising of the building. It shows, I believe it said that it was being raised 13 feet, but in fact it's being raised, it's required under FEMA to be raised 5'4", and it's proposed to be raised 7 feet to make the space usable underneath. And then with respect to that, because of the height of the raise, there are requirements for front yard mitigation to make the building not look quite as tall as it is. And then with respect to the parking pad in the front, there are many ECB violations for this parking pad, so clearly this was done without any approval from DOT or DOB or otherwise. That should be discussed in the application and in the zoning analysis. And actually, parking is not permitted in a front yard in these districts, so the parking must be located inside the building. That's it for me. Anybody else?
I think that they actually need to just remove the notation on their drawings about the parking pad. They say that DOB is going to approve it, and I think that's a little preemptive. I think
Or
they need
presumptuous.
Presumptuous. I think they need to take a look at that again. Also, I just had questions about the shape of the existing home. Their Sanborn seems to show that they've got a pretty regular square shape of a building. And now they've got a building that is not necessarily square, kind of has a little bump out, and it's also over the property line. So I'm questioning whether or not there had been some illegal work on this building prior to them coming here. There doesn't seem to have been any permits taken out for work. So I'm wondering if indeed portions of of the existing structure are actually legal, and anything that they're showing that they're keeping, I think they need to tell us that is a legal situation.
I have the same comments, so.
Item number 22, 10414BZ, 282 South Fifth Street, Brooklyn. This is also a PCE.
Okay. So this is for Planet Fitness in a new building, actually. Yeah. So first I was concerned because I was reading that there's residential use above this proposal, which is on the second floor, but as the section of the building shows, the residential tower is really set back away from the fitness center ceiling, and there even seems to be sort of a loggia on the first level of the tower that would separate the residential even more. If the applicant could just confirm that there are no shared demising walls or ceiling floor assemblies with the residential use, that would be great. That would help a lot. And I don't know the status of fire department and DOI sign-off community board recommendation. Does anybody, has that been submitted? We don't know. Okay,
no, sorry.
so we just need to find out whether that's been finalized.
I would like them to just give us a copy of the DOB approved plans for the floor to ensure that this area is zoned for commercial use and not community facility.
Item number 23, 14114BZ, 2465 Broadway, Manhattan. It's also PCE.
So this is, again, an extremely problematic case. It's a special permit for a physical culture establishment, and there's kind of been a history on the site where in '95, Equinox Gym received a special permit for a portion of the first floor. So this is a split lot, so it's a C46A and an R8 zoning district split lot. And in '95, Equinox received a special permit for the portion of the first floor that's not in the R8, and the second floor, which does not extend into the R8, it's just kind of a setback roof there, and a cellar, which included the R8 portion, though it couldn't have. But the C of O does not show any occupancy for any use in the cellar, so it's not at all clear what happened to that cellar. And in 2006, the BSA granted an extension of term and an amendment, and that resolution states that the PCE that was the subject, Equinox's PCE, PCE was located only in the C46A. So the portion, and so the proposed soul cycle actually extends into the R8 district, and the BSA has no authority to grant this special permit in residential districts. So either the space needs to be reconfigured, and I understand there may be leasing issues about this, but either the space needs to be reconfigured or the applicant has to come up with a variance case for this. And it's been difficult for me to come to any, in discussion with council and others, it's been difficult to figure out how the variance case might be argued, but we're open to creativity if the applicant can find it. Anybody else on this? Sorry. Homework needed always before application filed.
Item number 24, 5914BZ, 114, 122 Jackson Street, Brooklyn.
So this is an interesting various application for a settlement house, actually. And interesting because there are a lot of issues about how to make this application work in terms of the Cornell school deference. So the first part of it is that in order for there to be Cornell school deference, there needs to be a clear linkage between the activities of Settlement House and the public schools in the neighborhood, or it functioning actually as a school independently on its own. So there needs to be much more information. There was one letter from the principal of PS, I think 132, that indicated sort of an interest in working with Settlement House, but that's actually not adequate. We really need real serious commitments from the public schools or from the Department of Education that they will locate school-related programs in this building, that, you know, their buildings are inadequate and don't provide auditorium space and gymnasium space, and their after-school programs can't be met, or maybe even their daytime school programs can't be met in their existing facilities. The link needs to be very, very tight, and at the moment it's very loose. And in addition to which, the application goes on about the history of the settlement house or settlement association, and about how they used to have all of these really great programs that are school related, but it doesn't talk about what they actually will do with those commitments from schools. We need to know that that's what the program is, not what it was in the past. On the other hand, another way to pursue this is to say, okay, you're not going to rely on the Cornell deference for the A finding. Instead, we'll rely on a unique physical condition about the site. So there needs to be, there was a lot of discussion about why the existing building is obsolete, but in the cases cited, Boys and Girls Club and Kaufman Center, both of those retained the existing buildings. So the existing buildings were determined to be obsolete, and then that was how they got waivers to add more floors or more height and violate regulations that way. And in this case, the proposal is actually to tear the building down. So there needs to be a very tight linkage between, we have an obsolete building, the obsolete building doesn't permit us to pursue our program, therefore we have this huge expense associated with relocating program to offsite while the demolition is taking place and new construction is taking place, the cost of the demolition, all of the other issues, for instance, the discovery of the subsurface soil conditions that would not have been implicated had it just been an addition to the building. Those kinds of things that are driven by the fact that the building needs to come down. or the building is obsolete. And then to work, of course, what was raised already was about the high water table and subsurface soil conditions. So that's yet another unique physical condition, but it needs to be built together to show that it's an extreme hardship caused by the site. And then in terms of programmatic needs, the application is very unclear about these programmatic needs. The statement says the statement of facts just says the applicant needs to maximize floor area. So does everyone. But there needs to be a programmatic needs description that explains the required sizes for each of the classrooms and what number of students that's accommodating and for what function, similar to what was done for the gym/auditorium. I have trouble with that word, gymatorium. And the materials that were provided from the School Construction Authority as sort of a guide doesn't show any sizes of rooms or of the gym. That has to be provided by a school planner. They do actually have those ideal sizes. We note also that the layouts of the floors are extremely inefficient with very wide corridors all the way around. Is that a programmatic requirement, those wide corridors? Does something go on in the corridors? Otherwise, why can't there just be more classrooms packed in there, in which case you don't need so much height, you don't need so much floor area. There's a classroom on the roof. What is that? Why is it there? It just makes the building even taller than it already is. It's adjacent to the outdoor recreational space. Is it related somehow to that space? The outdoor rec space is tiny by comparison. It's kind of this funny little caged area. Is that for small children? What's that about? Also, the floor-to-floor heights are extremely high. They're 18 feet at the first and second floor. And it doesn't, there's no explanation for why that kind of height would be needed. You should show also on the plans the height to the lower roof level. Only the upper roof, the top of that classroom is shown. And then with the noise from the rooftop recreation area that's going to be caused, how will this be mitigated, preventing neighbors from being really fraught with noise from that? And also the cage on the roof needs to be dimensioned. It's not, and the cage itself is not discussed at all in the statement with respect to the apparent building height. And then we need a better study on neighborhood character, including photographs of the area of the taller buildings and why an 89-foot-high building is in character. There should be some discussion about the 77-foot-high lower roof because it's actually not an 89-foot-high building. This portion is 89 feet. And then finally, for me, the statement of facts can't depend on us to go reading through all the data that's submitted and figure out from the Muser-Rutledge report and school construction and the letter from PS 132 what your argument is. You have to make the argument in the statement of facts, and it all has to be consolidated into the statement. Barry, what else?
Yeah, I actually agree with you concerning whether or not this actually could be considered a school. I think if they want to be considered a school, in many other cases, we've also requested this, they have to somehow show that they're regulated or monitored by either the city or state Department of Education. They also need to show us whether or not they have a set curriculum. Now, if they want to be considered a school simply because they might be somehow taking on some of the programs of surrounding schools, then it's not enough to have a letter from a principal of one of the schools saying, yeah, it'd be nice, we'd like to have our gym classes. There needs to be some sort of a statement coming from the Department of Education that actually says, yes, we are considering using this space as an annex for our educational programs. Then maybe we could get into the conversation of whether or not this actually serves as a school. In terms of their need to enlarge because they've got a large increase in population, they need to give us more of a linkage between their neighborhood, how that neighborhood relates to the population of Community Board 1 and how it relates to the population of Williamsburg. And not just the growth rate of the city and then the growth rate of CB1, but give us actual numbers. What does that actually represent? Is that an extra 50,000 people in the neighborhood, 5,000 people, which may have 2 children in each family, of which there are 5,000 families? But they need to give us information that actually ties that into why this building needs to be larger to accommodate the young people and old people in the neighborhood. When they talk about the obsolescence of the building, and they say it's not up to current code, they leave a lot of it to our imagination to kind of finish that argument, and I think they need to specifically tell us what code are you talking about and what sections of the code are actually regulating what goes into this building and how you are deficient. So they make a statement basically saying that there are only restrooms on the 2nd floor. Well, what does the code say for an institution like this? Do they have to be restrooms on every floor? Is there a minimum size to restrooms? They don't go into any detail. They also say that there's only one restroom, and for a large population of different ages, there needs to be more. Well, is that a code? Does there need to be separate restrooms for people under 18 and people over 18? They don't really go into detail. They kind of leave it to us to try and figure it out. They also talk about the corridors being too narrow, and yet they're not stating what part of the code requires that corridors be of certain width. When they talk about the difficulty of demolishing and rebuilding because of the subsurface conditions, and they talk about how the water table is shallow, and they say groundwater is found 4 to 10 feet higher than the rest of Brooklyn, and it will cost a certain amount. They really need to include how many feet below grade is the water table. I mean, because we know that it's found a lot shallower than in other areas in Brooklyn, but we still don't have any actual set footage, like, okay, it's found at 4 feet below grade and the average cellar would be excavated 12 feet below, and so that's why it wouldn't work or it would be too expensive. And I agree with you. I think that this is a very large building in that neighborhood, and it does not make the character finding as it stands, and they really need to look into lowering the floor-to-floor heights on the 2 lower floors, because it's just classrooms, and I don't see why it has to be 18 feet high for each one.
I agree with everything that's been said. I really did not see any real nexus between their programmatic need and how they actually laid out the building. They're not very clear as to how those classrooms are used, why they're the size that they are. They don't really give us, any real schedule for the day and how those classrooms will be used by whom. They have an entire floor of office space that I guess is devoted for their senior unit, but they don't explain how that would be incorporated into sort of the whole school idea. So I think that they need to talk about that. They do mention that they, I guess, would be offering UPK class, but they don't really go into, which would make, their finding. They don't go into whether they're actually going to be doing that. Do they have a contract with the city to do that? Also, I think I need them to describe not only the building use, but why they've chosen to put what I would consider probably the most used area, which is the gym area, higher up in the building. If you've ever been to sort of, a Y or a community facility of this type, typically the gym is going to be either, basement or the first floor, because you've got a lot of kids going in and out. And if you've only got one point of entry and one guard, they need to know where those kids are in the building. And typically then, older people's activities are above the first floor. So I'm just wondering if even sort of the design of this can't be kind of re-looked at to bring down the scale of the building a little bit. And I too was wondering why there are 18-foot ceilings in office spaces. So those are my comments.
Well, I thought the Muser Rutledge report was rather thorough, and I understood why they can't put the gym below grade with it, requiring a 24-foot clearance height, and it would put the foundations on clay, which would not be a suitable material, would require a much more expensive foundation plan. But it seems to me that a limited cellar could be constructed that didn't require the ceiling height of a gym, that could contain some storage, some mechanicals, perhaps some trash, sort of stepped away from the adjacent buildings, even on a portion of the new building. And I was concerned because they have an existing alleyway where they have 2 trash bins, that they're not really replacing them in terms of their plans. What is their trash mitigation plan? Well, how are they going to handle that? And in part of their report, they did mention that they're going to have to underpin the adjacent buildings, and depending upon the level of the adjacent basement/cellars, they have to excavate below those foundations. So they may actually have to excavate to, say, a depth of 8 to 10 feet anyway. So wouldn't that allow them the ability to construct a partial cellar?
Okay. This concludes the Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for October 6, 2014.
Thank you.